Now, exactly a week ago today, there was the Democratic debate on CBS. I was going to say CNBC, but that was wrong, so I'm going to do that part again. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Motley Show, where we take one of the bigger stories in news and politics each week, trying to step outside the echo chamber and see what's really going on and why should we care. Now, exactly a week ago today was the Democratic debate on CBS, and the whole flavor of that debate obviously changed because the night before was the Paris attacks. So that dominated the overall discussion in terms of security and what would you do as commander-in-chief in favor of terrorism. Would you use the words Islamic terrorists or radical Islam versus radical jihadists? And does that really matter? Now, overall, was it a big night for anybody? It's hard to say. There was no real knockout moments for any of the three candidates. Martin O'Malley did good, stood up well for himself. Sanders was Sanders, but I feel like Sanders started to slip a little bit under the pressure, kind of going back to talking points and just saying them over and over again when he didn't really want to answer a question the way that I know he could. And Clinton did her thing well again. She was well prepared to take on certain questions that she didn't want to answer in the right way, but certain dodges that she did take actually got called out during the debate by people on Twitter because they were taking in live questions, but we'll get to that. So let's start at the beginning. The debate took place at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. And it's interesting because Iowa is the first state where all the voting begins. It's the first state to have a caucus. Now, during everyone's opening statements, they all said something about the attacks in Paris. In fact, that was called on by the moderator, who said, "Give me your opening statements and your thoughts on the attack on Paris," which I thought was a little weird considering they only have a minute to make their opening statement. And if you really want to give a heartfelt statement about the people in Paris, that should take at least 30 seconds. That's going to take up most of your time. And everybody was very heartfelt about their thoughts going out to them. But I will make a small point. Martin O'Malley stumbled a little bit and he said, "My hearts go out to the people in Paris." And I thought, I knew it, he's a Time Lord. And another note about the entire debate overall was the fact that the camera work was terrible. There were numerous times where they would float the candidate to the side, like so, expecting on-screen graphics right here to show up, and they never did. And then other times it was just weird. They were just moving around. It was constantly like zooming in on the candidate, coming back. I don't know what was going on. And then I'm going to give credit to the moderator and to the questioners at that debate because they have definitely taken a note from the previous debates and made sure that they weren't ever thought of as being softball questions. The moderator went after Clinton immediately with really good, solid questions. At one point, she was asked about the idea that because we went into Iraq, because we destabilized that region and then left with not really a good standing army in Iraq of ours or theirs that could handle the situation, that we inadvertently or directly led to the creation of ISIS and to the proliferation of their network. And she said, no. We are not the major ones to blame. It was Iraq itself failed to take responsibility when we left. Assad attacked his own people, which created even more hatred among those people, which created those people to go further into ISIS. And basically the whole region itself screwed up, which Sanders took umbrage with, saying, no, look, you have to admit the vote to go into Iraq, the vote that you took to attack Iraq back after 9/11 did directly cause ISIS to grow. In fact, ISIS to be created. And he added on to that something he's been saying for a while now, that climate change is still our #1 national security threat. And the reason for that being, as climate change gets worse, as it gets hotter and hotter in certain areas where they don't have water, they won't be able to grow food, you're going to see food crisis. You're going to see food wars. And there are going to be towns and cities and cultures that are going to attack each other just for their resources. So if we don't solve for that, the idea of religious wars is going to pale in comparison. But Clinton fired back saying that the Iraq war wasn't itself the cause of terrorism. There was terrorism long before 9/11 ever happened. There was terrorism in Beirut. There was terrorism in Libya. There was terrorism all the way back through time. So let's not blame her faulty vote in Iraq as one of the main causes of terrorism today. And I don't think anyone was saying that, and I think it was kind of a weak answer because no one would ever think that terrorism didn't exist before 9/11. Now, if I did have one little criticism about the moderator in the CBS debate, was the fact that he did pose a question to Senator Sanders that seemed only to be clickbait for television. He asked him, well, Mr. Sanders, do you have any direct criticism of Hillary Clinton's term as Secretary of State? Which the underlying sentiment was, if you do have that criticism, could you please make it into a nice little soundbite and tell it to her right here on her face, because that would make perfect drama. And of course, he's the wrong person to ask about that because Sanders has long said he's not going to run a negative campaign. He's going to do pretty much everything he can not to attack his rivals. But that did happen a little bit during this debate, and I'm going to get to that. Now, continuing the subject of the Iraq War and what happened there, Martin O'Malley said the big problem was the human intelligence on the ground was lacking. That's why the war was a bad idea. That's why we screwed it up so much, was because we had terrible intelligence on the ground, and that's where we need to put all of our investments. That's where we need to be focusing, is human intelligence on the ground. Now, he's not saying boots on the ground. He's not saying, yeah, I want to put people and soldiers there. Basically, we need more spies. We need more special ops. We need more strong networks of information that we can trust and we can verify. Now, my issue with this is he says that's the key. That's the key to all terrorism. And that's the key to basically getting rid of ISIS. That's the key to what's going on in Iraq and Afghanistan. My personal thought is, while that is helpful, I think one of the keys to the problem there is the fact that we blew up a lot of that country during the war and are continuing to blow up parts of Syria and Afghanistan and Pakistan. And the problem is that no one's going in after the fact to rebuild these areas. Contracts were given out to all of Donald Rumsfeld's friends, all of Dick Cheney's friends, but those jobs have been pitifully poor in terms of what's needed there. Personal opinion, you build them running water pipes. You give them homes that they can live in. You rebuild their schools so they can be educated. Those are the key, including human intelligence on the ground about radicalism that is going on. But until you get those first things, until you get building and infrastructure back on point, nothing's going to get better. I'm moving on. And going back to something I just said about boots on the ground, O'Malley made a really good statement, and I really strongly agree with this. O'Malley talked about meeting a mom whose son is a soldier and has gone over there, and she said, please, please, for the love of Pete, stop using the term boots on the ground. My son is not a pair of boots. He is a human, he is a person, and he deserves more respect to just be thought of as a pair of shoes. And I think that's an awesome statement, because it is totally true, because when we send soldiers into a war zone, we tell them to go fight and to kill. We need to keep in mind the human cost. We need to remember deep, deep down in our souls that these are people, that these are not just numbers, they are not shoes, they are not cannon fodder. Another small personal note about Governor O'Malley, I think he's a robot. He could be a robot Time Lord. He's got laser beam eyes, does not blink. It's creepy. In fact, even Rachel Maddow said that after she did the forum with them. I think she said she might melt under his gaze. It's weird. Hillary Clinton got the first website dropped during the debate, but eventually they all did, especially in their closing statements. They ended each statement by saying, go to .com. And I know it's a good way for them to raise money. I know it's what they need to network. I know it's what they need to build that support, but goddamn, it feels pathetic. It feels so sad to see them up there saying, like, go to my website, please, click here, do this. I'd rather that just come on as a graphic or something, you know, when they tried to move them this way. They should have just put it up there. Because I want a commander-in-chief. I don't want an infomercial salesman. At the end of the debate, they went to another reporter. They showed where the big spikes were on Twitter for each candidate. Now for O'Malley, his biggest spike is when he decided to take a direct attack at Donald Trump and call him an immigrant-bashing carnival barker. But it's kind of weird because it came slightly out of nowhere in terms of why he used it. You feel like he was saving it up, but either way, that was his biggest moment of the night in terms of his activity on Twitter. Clinton's was later on when she said that 60% of her supporters online, the people who are giving her money, are women, and she's very proud of that. And Sanders came when he said that he is less of a socialist than Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was a Republican, because back in Eisenhower's term, the actual rate of taxation of the richest in the country was 90%. 90%. Sanders isn't going to go that far. At one point, the topic of minimum wage came up, and both Sanders and O'Malley said, yes, we want to go to the $15 an hour minimum wage. We are part of that process. We are part of that protest. But Clinton said studies and other economists that she trusts have said going to $15 could be dangerous. It's not actually the right number. Going to 12 is the right number, and then let cities and states and towns push it even farther if they want to, which is exactly what's going on in O'Malley's state. They've pushed it up not as far as 15, but they've had towns and cities that have pushed it even farther up. And that's what's working. So Clinton's saying, let's just replicate that instead of making a nationwide $15 an hour, which of course Sanders is completely against. He wants a nationwide $15 an hour because he says that's the lowest you can get as a living wage, and someone who works 40 hours a week should not actually be on welfare. And going back to terrorism for a moment, there was a lot of time spent on ISIS because ISIS took credit for the recent Paris attacks. So when they kept talking about terrorism and dismantling the terrorism network, it was a lot about let's take care of ISIS, we will get rid of ISIS, 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 ISIS. But there's still a little bit of pandering here. There's still a little bit of feeding off of clickbait titles, and ISIS is the big title right now. But if you really want to go after terrorism, you really want to dismantle global terrorism, ISIS is still not your number one target. If you're looking at body count, if you're looking at actual terrorist activity and power and evil, while ISIS is quite all of those things, Boko Haram is still more deadly. The attacks that they've taken credit for in Nigeria and in that area are still worse. Although they consider themselves an offshoot of Al-Qaeda and even an affiliate to ISIS, they're worse. And they just took credit for another suicide bomb in Nigeria, and it was a 13-year-old girl who was wearing it. So again, stepping outside the echo chamber a little bit, when you hear somebody talking about terrorism, if they only talk about ISIS, if that's their only point of reference, they're not taking in the whole picture. Now, this was a really interesting point when Sanders and Clinton got into a back and forth about whether or not she could be trusted to go after Wall Street because so many of her donors are from Wall Street. And this is where she brought up the point about 60% of her donors being female. While that might be true, that's not exactly what they were talking about. It's the fact that she's getting millions and millions of dollars from Wall Street, and how could she be trusted to punish them and to regulate them when that's exactly what they don't want if she gets into office? Now, her answer was the height of pandering, and to me, it felt like the weakest moment that Clinton had, was she started talking about 9/11. The fact that she was the senator from New York when 9/11 happened, that she went down there to Wall Street, which was attacked. When you talk about who got attacked on 9/11, it was Wall Street. That's where the World Trade Center was. And she was there to suffer with those people, but also help them back up. And that's why they're giving her money, because they like her because she was there for them. Not because she threatens to regulate them, which they don't like, but they trust her because she's a good person. And seriously, in a talk about whether or not you could be trusted to regulate Wall Street, the idea of bringing up the specter of 9/11 and getting everyone's patriotic fervor up is really weak sauce. And my favorite moment of the night was the fact that because the debate was live and being monitored with Twitter, and they were checking Twitter, one of the moderators actually called Clinton out and brought up a tweet from somebody who said, Clinton using 9/11 as an excuse for why she can't regulate Wall Street is sad. I'm paraphrasing the tweet, but that was the basic point. And Clinton apologized, saying if that's the tone that the person took from it, that's not what she meant. But still, she was called out during the debate by a citizen watching. And I thought to myself, could you imagine that happening to Donald Trump or Ted Cruz? It would be amazing. Now, another question that came from the moderator later on that I took a little bit of umbrage with was when he asked Governor O'Malley about whether or not he would have any Wall Streeters in his cabinet. And I understand the question, saying that there's too much collusion between Wall Street and the government that is supposed to be regulating them. And when you keep bringing in Wall Street people into the financial cabinets and to financial places of power, obviously you don't think you're going to regulate them because these people work for those same companies. They're going to protect their interests. They're going to protect their friends. But what I don't like about that question is the term Wall Streeters, because again, you paint everybody with one brush. While completely different topics, it's the same activity of when you say all Syrians are terrorists. You can't say everyone who works at Wall Street is an evil person. There are investment bankers who are good people, who are trying to take middle-class American families, take a little bit of their money, with their permission of course, and help make them lots of money so that they can retire better. There are good people there. You can't say everyone there is evil. Everyone there is DiCaprio from The Wolf of Wall Street. It was an unfair question and shouldn't have been asked. Now, as they moved on to gun violence, Clinton once again went after Sanders, saying that he took a vote to protect gun stores, and that was the wrong vote to have, and she rallied the crowd around it, and so did O'Malley. And what was weird is Sanders defended himself, saying, I come from a state with no gun laws whatsoever, and I still got voted in. I voted to ban assault weapons. He voted for universal background checks. And he listed off all these things he's done for gun control, but yet he didn't defend the vote. And that's what I think he should have done, because he did it once. He did it once in one debate, and for some reason he's decided that didn't play well. But to me, that played perfectly because he explained the vote. He kind of said it right at the end of the discussion when he talked about there were things in the bill that he liked and things that he didn't, and he wanted a stronger bill. Which is important because that's a problem with how bills get passed, is that you get multiple things wrapped up into one bill, things you like and things you don't like, and you have to figure out, can you swallow the bitter pill of the bad things to take the good things in the bill? And this was one of those points where Sanders said, no, I can't take that because there's something wrong with this bill that included gun store legislation. And when he explained it before, I totally agreed with him. What he wanted to do was protect legal gun stores from having legal sales. So if me, who has no criminal background, decided to register to carry, and I went to a gun store and bought a gun, totally legal. I go through the background check, I wait the appointed time, I get a regular gun, it's not some sort of bazooka or a rocket launcher, and I walk out with that gun. Now, 3 weeks later, I decide to use that gun to kill somebody. That gun store that sold it to me has no liability. There's absolutely no reason that someone should go after that gun store or that gun manufacturer because they followed the letter of the law. They gave a legal gun to a legal gun owner. The bill that Sanders didn't vote for didn't take a specification on gun stores that broke those laws, gun stores that jumped through those loopholes, selling guns to people who didn't go through the background check, selling guns to people with mental health problems, selling guns that shouldn't be sold, not doing a background check. Those gun stores should be held liable, but not the good ones. There are good gun stores, just like there are good Wall Streeters. And that's what he's trying to say, but in fact, he never really said it. And I think that's the wrong way to go. I think he needs to make that point, because then he paints O'Malley and Clinton as over overzealous in attacking all gun owners. And if he's looking for middle ground in the country, that's a place to find it. And during this conversation, Sanders did have a weird moment though, because as he said numerous times, he's not going to run a negative campaign. He's not going to take swipes at his fellow candidates, but he did at one point because O'Malley criticized him about guns. And before Sanders started talking about his answer, he just said, well, you know, Baltimore's not exactly the safest city. And the crowd even was like, oh, really? It was a weird moment for Sanders, and he should really avoid going that direction. He's got a kind of a reputation for standing above that kind of fray. And that's why I said earlier on that I think he's starting to slip a little bit. And also earlier on, I said that Clinton was getting attacked by both sides. And one of the big things that she was getting attacked with was the fact that during her husband's reign, Glass-Steagall was taken out. And this was the law that actually separated commercial banking with investment banking, with speculative banking. And that's what helped lead to the financial crisis in 2008. So Sanders is calling for the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall. O'Malley is calling for an updated reinstatement of Glass-Steagall. And they're saying that's the big thing that Clinton won't say that makes her a bad candidate for especially this financial era. And she dodged this and she dodged this, but finally she came out with an answer that I think she should have said from the beginning, which was not that she's against Glass-Steagall, but that law alone is not going to get the job done, and she has a more comprehensive bill that will be much stronger and get the things done that we need to get done. Now, I don't know if that's actually true. I haven't read her proposal, but if that's her stance, she needs to say that, and not that she doesn't want to reinstate Glass-Steagall, because that's what everybody knows right now as being one of the key causes of the financial crisis. Sanders later on was also challenged again about his support of certain gun laws, and asked why, when there was 92% support for universal background checks, 92% throughout the country, that bill still went nowhere in the Senate, nowhere in the Congress. How could it be, if Sanders is talking about a political revolution, getting the people involved, getting the people to basically take their government back? Yeah, they say it too. And there was that much support for that idea. How could that not get through Congress? How could those senators and Congress people not listen to their constituents and actually push that through? And Sanders talked about the broken campaign finance system, talked about corruption between lobbyists and politicians. He talked about all this stuff and somehow managed to do that whole thing without mentioning the NRA at all, which really was the key reason why that didn't happen. The NRA pressured every single lawmaker, saying that they were going to score that vote and they were going to attack every single lawmaker that voted for universal background checks, and they backed off. So again, a weird moment from Sanders, not saying something that really was key to what was going on. And the last back and forth was between Clinton and Sanders about a single-payer healthcare system. Clinton wanted to paint Sanders, and this was the first time I've ever heard somebody do this, as someone who wants to destroy the healthcare system as it is, repeal Obamacare fully, get rid of Medicare, get rid of TRICARE, get rid of Medicaid, and create this whole new system that obviously is going to fail and is not going to be very good. But I've never heard someone put it that way, that he wants to rip apart all the systems that we have. And he ended up retorting saying, I don't want to get rid of Medicare, I want to expand it to everyone. And yes, when I do expand it to everyone, the Affordable Care Act will not be necessary. So again, not that he wants to repeal it, he wants to replace it with something better. Now you contrast that with the GOP that says we're going to repeal and replace Obamacare, but really aren't putting up any sort of plans. Sanders' plan is just give Medicare to everybody, make it a single payer system. And Clinton says the party, all Democrats, should stop talking about repealing Obamacare in any fashion and stop basically saying anything's wrong with it and support it loudly and proudly, because if they don't and the GOP does get into power, they're going to further erode the Affordable Care Act until it's not there at all. And she made a point about saying that if he did create Medicare for everybody, there are so many GOP controlled states right now that they would just all block it, which is what they're doing with the Affordable Care Act as it is. But I think Sanders' point is that if they create a federal healthcare system, that they don't make it so that it's actually employed by the states at all. They just make it federal, then the states can't block it. Everyone living in those states will just get it directly from the federal government and not from the state government. And maybe that would work. I don't know. So all in all, there were no big fireworks per se in this debate, but it was a good debate and it was challenging to all the candidates. And it's really interesting when you get to feel and hear so many different answers and points of view from the same candidates, because there's only 3 of them on stage. They get to spend an hour and a half of actual time together, versus when you have 10 or 11 people on stage and each one barely gets 5 minutes to really speak. Now eventually we'll get there as the GOP winnows down to their real candidates, but something tells me it's going to take a while to get there. So the question for this week, what did you think of the Democratic debate? Are there any of those candidates, any of those 3 people actually swaying your vote right now? Do you feel Clinton's getting better? Do you feel Sanders is shaking or getting better? Do you feel O'Malley is actually getting enough attention to gain support? Are you scared of O'Malley's eyes like I am? Let me know in the comments down below. So thanks for watching another episode of the Motley Stew Show. If you haven't subscribed to this or any of the daily vlogs that I've been doing, you can subscribe to either of those right about here. You can also like, favorite, or share this video to anyone you think would want to jump into the discussion, become part of the stew. Stay tuned for next week, and as always, here's one of the kids.
Very good. And give her a piece. Oh, piece, okay. You got it. You want to give it to her? Here, hold it. Hold it. Get it.
I just want to get out of
Is
this.
that funny? Ready?
You got a big old tongue?
Oh, he ate it all. Is that awesome?
Yeah, let's do one more time.
No, that's it. That's it.
We gotta make sure that everybody else has room to do it.
Is that really cool? Is he big? Yeah. He says hi. You think he's gonna try to lick you? I think so. He says, you don't have food?
That's a good.
No, you can't go over there. Is that cool?
Yeah.
You say bye, Mr. Giraffe?
Bye, Mr. Giraffe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Their segments, as in most segments that happen on 60 Minutes, were filmed in completely different locations, this time being New York and Russia, filmed at completely different times. So if Donald Trump actually thinks that they met, then now we know he's completely delusional. And if he knows that they didn't meet, now we know he's lying. But if anything brings me back to happiness, it is this week's Fanboy Friday, is this game series called The Room. And not to be confused with the movie The Room, which you can be a fanboy as well, but for totally different reasons. Because it's great to be fans of that version of The Room because it's terrible. But this game is amazing. It is one of the best puzzle games, if not the best games I've ever played on the iPad.